When a business is looking at either actually transforming or actually running themselves better, they are not looking for BPM. So they are BPM, the way we do it, is a means to an end.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in today's episode, I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Tiger Pillay. And now Tiger is the principal consultant at Avadeen Consulting. I had a great conversation with Tiger just a couple of days ago about his background, his experience, and what he's been doing. And this is going to be an exciting interview, an exciting conversation. We're going to pack this with Tiger's experiences and his stories from all of the challenges that he's overcome and in the whole BPM space. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Tiger, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure, Daniel.
So what we might do to kick things off, Tiger, is I'll pass it over to you to give us a bit more of a context and background into your journey in the BPM space. And I guess starting off with, how were you first introduced to this topic, and take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's it actually took me the first 20 years of my career before I realized there was a sort of discipline called BPM. I didn't realize I was actually practicing it for a long, long while. And once that penny dropped, I got open to a few more ways of doing things. So, some of the key experiences that actually landed me in the sort of BPM discipline, in that, I've been working predominantly financial services in the last 20 years, and that's everything from I'm a chartered accountant, so it's actually everything from actually designing the annual report to trying to figure out how we get the data to populate the annual report and the processes that sit beneath those. And I ended up, in financial services as well, where we I think it was 2004-5 when Sarbanes-Oxley was being implemented here in Australia, and it was really quite interesting that internal controls became a key aspect of it. So I ended up doing a black belt in governance frameworks. And so, it's a really interesting topic, actually. So I've become a bit of a financial services specialist. And once we put the BPM label on it, it was really, at the end of the day, how do we actually manage our business better, transform our business better, actually leveraging our process knowledge is where I've landed.
That's great. That's awesome.
It's just evolved from there. I've been with one of the big four banks in Australia for close to 17, 18 years. And over that period of time, various roles. And what's become really clear to me is that everything is steeped into process knowledge.
Right.
So, and once you start looking at process knowledge, I ran an innovation program. I ran a department in the learning center, and I actually, ran CI teams. And my last sort of role was actually developing the process architecture and strategy for the organization, leveraging, some of those experiences. And it's, and I think a lot of people don't, especially from the business perspective, they don't actually fully appreciate the fact that everything we do is steeped in our process knowledge.
Right. And why do you think that is? What do you think the case is there?
Well, the task for management really is twofold, right? They've got to run the business and they've got to transform the business at the same time. Every organization I've ever come across, they've got to do the day job. They've got to earn the revenue for the year, to keep costs under control, and that's effectively running the business. Transforming the business, I don't know many organizations that don't have an investment portfolio that's looking at reshaping what it looks like, be it digital transformation, be it, new customer experiences, or whatever it may be, new product, all of those kind of things. That's transformative in nature. So the task of any of our business leaders, how do we do what we're doing today, stabilize it, and at the same time, how do we set up for tomorrow? And the business activity that underpins both, it's the same set of, it's the same business activity as they would like to hear. But to us in the profession, it's processes. So,
Right.
You read business activity processes to be exactly the same thing.
Yes, right. And what would you say are some of the biggest drivers for an organization to adopt BPM? Obviously, every organization, depending on the industry, will have different challenges they're facing. I'm sure that there are some organizations that have sort of jumped into the whole BPM space because they saw a competitor sort of adopt all of these exciting and fancy tools. But what would you say are some of the biggest drivers for adopting this process-centric approach?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to remember is that when a business is looking at either actually transforming or actually running themselves better, they are not looking for BPM. So they are, BPM, the way we do it, is a means to an end. So I think the key strategic drivers where we play a significant role, and this is where our skill sets as a community comes in, is that how do we actually solve those problems for them? And those strategic challenges generally is, grouped around 5 key buckets, especially when I think about it from a financial services perspective. The first one is really very much focused on customer experiences. Now, most organizations have got, 5 to 6 years ago, you would never have heard of a CX program or a UX program or an MX program. It's all there. So customer experiences has become number one. So solving for customer problems. The second one I throw out there, specifically for financial services, it's all about compliance excellence. Now, compliance excellence is a phrase that we've actually coined over the past couple of years, and it's really all about actually ensuring that as organizations we can meet our compliance obligations. And it's not just meeting compliance obligations, but meeting it effectively and cheaply. We're very fortunate here in our part of the world in that our financial services is a lot more profitable than some other geographies around the world. The cost of compliance in most of those areas, you'd see it's close to 8 to 10% of total operating costs. Now, we're fairly profitable here in our part of the world. We don't have that cost challenge just yet, but in Europe, it is becoming a significant challenge. And when I say it's significant, it's actually making the difference whether organizations stay afloat or not. So managing compliance has become really, really critical. The second or the third aspect I generally call out, and what most of us would be very, very familiar with, because that's where we play, and that's operational excellence, productivity, productivity targets, doing it better, all of those aspects. So I won't say too much on that. Everyone knows what that is. The fourth one I generally talk about is business resilience. And so when we talk about business resilience, and we were doing this even before COVID hit, it's actually tying up our business community, our disaster recovery, our IT systems back to the main service lines that the organization has. So call it service lines, revenue lines, whatever it is. But when you start to look at resilient strategies, and you see the regulators are leaning more into resilient strategies now, it's about how do you keep the organization afloat. And it's not just about business unit, business unit continuity plans or IT disaster recovery. And the last one generally I talk about is that how can we leverage that knowledge to effectively transform, when you kick off a project, when you kick off an investment initiative, if you're replacing a system, we need to be absolutely clear what business activity that underpins, or processes as we call them. So that's the primary drivers I see. And for us as a community, we need to be able to show value across more than one of those. So it's never just the operational excellence that a lot of us, traditionally have defaulted to, and we did not see playing in the CX space or the actual compliance space as being our remit, but it absolutely is.
Right. From my experience, I've come across organizations that have sort of kicked back against this whole idea of process management because they have this huge focus on being agile and being quick and being adaptable, and for whatever reason their perspective or experience of the whole BPM space has been it's sort of steeped in governance, and it slows things down, and it presents more challenges than it's worth. What would you say to those people that maybe have that mindset or have that perspective? They're not interested in sort of, I guess, managing their business processes because they have this fear that, you know, if they don't stay sort of nimble and quick and agile, they're going to get disrupted by a competitor or a startup or something like that.
If we're talking about business leaders, in this sense, they are doing it without realizing they're doing it, right? At the end of the day, if we take a simple example of, you know, coming from financial services, if you got mortgage applications coming in, or a lending application, or credit card application, whatever it is, they do manage it, they do process it, they do make sure the customer at the end of the day, credit card, they get the card in their hand. They are doing it. And so what we should not be confusing them with is a level of detail they need to know to run that process effectively. So, you know, how much of information are we giving them? I think some of the challenges I've actually observed and I've faced into is that our community, we actually make it difficult for ourselves because we generally try to educate the senior leader, which is, to my mind, not the right way to go about it. Because at the end of the day, the fact that we are there and we are working with them means that those leaders realize they need to do something. They probably know what they need to do. They just don't know how. And that's where we come in. And so we need to go in there, and we need to not, start with the mindset that these leaders need to be re-educated, that, you know, BPM is this weird and wonderful discipline and we're not appreciated, that kind of stuff, because I get that. I've been there. But it's more along the lines of, what problem is that business leader trying to solve, and how are we solving it for them? And we need to keep it simple. We need to talk their languages. So if they don't want to hear process management, you know, they don't want to hear the term operations management, because you will get it from multiple leaders. That's the operations area. I'm running onboarding here, which is not operations. And it's like, at the end of the day, call it what you want, right? You are running business activity. And so if you need to talk business activity and tell them managing your business activity better, or whatever the phrase is, that's a language we should be talking. I've been reasonably successful because I don't actually talk about what they're not doing. You know, we need to talk about what they're doing, because fairly often, and I've seen this in my experiences as well, we'll start off with a process maturity assessment and we'll score them, and, you know, straight away academic, eyes glass over. But we need to latch onto the one thing that's going to work for them.
Yeah, right. And obviously these senior leaders, they will want to know, what's the return going to be on my investment if we invest into this space, in additional resources or in tool sets or things like that. They're going to want to know, show us some case studies, show us some examples of where other organizations have adopted this and I guess realized significant value for the organization. Do you have a couple of stories where an organization has adopted BPM, and in whatever sort of in whatever area, because it's such a broad space, they have seen significant value from this process-centric approach?
Yeah. So the first, thing that I've seen directly, really, it's really in the compliance space, right? When I talk about the cost of compliance, one of the biggest challenges we have with the cost of compliance, it's really, in the first instance, not knowing what your cost is. So it's actually that compliance taxonomy that comes into play. But the second thing is that you find that internal controls is a massive ask for any of the financial services, not just financial services, for most organizations, for most highly regulated industries, whether it's pharmaceutical, telcos, so internal controls becomes quite crucial. However, specifically to financial services, you're finding that the automation rate is roughly 10 to 15%. And so when you talk about why is, 90% of your controls, or 90 to 85% of your controls manual and not the other way around, it sort of raises an eyebrow, and it's like, well, didn't know. Because let's face it, we it's 2021, it's a technology world. There's no business that actually operates without having some form of technology in there. Otherwise, you wouldn't even have Outlook, right? So at the end of the day, why are we reliant on manual checklist for internal controls, whereas we should be automating most of what we have in there? So when it comes to business case and benefits, that is easily translatable, because now it makes sense, because controls resources, or resources in that risk and compliance space, are very expensive. They're not they're not the sort of analyst you'd find in an operations area. They are, more often than not, they come from one of the big four accounting firms or audit firms, and they bring that risk and that risk background, that audit background. So that's one sort of benefit we talk about a lot. In terms of other use cases, most organizations nowadays have got productivity targets, and we generally tie, and in other words, operational excellence, that's actually reducing cost base 5% year on year. And we, as a community, come in, and when we, they expect BPM to be able to deliver that. But BPM is not about just improving your business, as I said, that because that's the transformation aspect, but it's actually running it effectively as well. So bringing in the data, those kind of things. And I think once, when you're looking at benefits in business case, it's what's the problem you're trying to solve. I mean, I know one of the organizations has kickstarted on this massive CX program that was spending, $80-90 million a year. But, and this was at the early days of when customer experience, journey modeling, everything else was just hitting, was actually hitting the industry. But they didn't bring the whole organization along for the journey, and they didn't employ that sort of transformation mindset. Because when you're looking at what that process is they're trying to transform, multiple parts of the business that need to play in as well. And so it's not one side of the business that's got to look at it. It's all of business, and the benefits speak for itself.
Right. So how do you bring everyone along for this journey? Because obviously, as you mentioned, there are many stakeholders involved. There are plenty of people whose daily work could potentially be disrupted and changed. So how do you bring people along for the journey so that you aren't facing resistance or hurdles, but you have people that have bought into the vision and know why the organization is embarking on this transformation?
Yeah, I've been, in that instance, I've been fairly fortunate in that the sponsor for the piece of work I've generally had, I was able to connect really well. I was able to get the message across that, this is not just transforming or updating or, getting your particular business silo to be managed better. And I've been really clear, we can do that. And here's your gains, and here's your benefits, and then you call out and say, look, but here's what it means for the organization. And so when you do that, the sponsor starts to, their eyes start to open, because there's upstream and downstream impacts. Really, I'm not in favor of reaching out into another part of the business unit on my own without my sponsor being aware of it. And in many instances, opening the door, because if I cannot get my sponsor to see what that is and appreciate the benefits and why we need to get other areas engaged, then, I'm actually hitting my head against a brick wall, because there's going to be a resistance. They've probably got their own people telling them exactly what I'm telling my sponsor. But if the sponsors connect, we have that dialogue happening.
Yes, right. And what's the difference between making small tweaks to your core processes versus more, say, radical innovation? Obviously, over the last 10, 15 years, especially, we've had a lot of industries disrupted by startup companies that, are entering industries and delivering value in a completely new and different way. We've seen that happen in the financial services space. We've seen it happen in the hospitality space, in in a lot of different industries, and large organizations have been disrupted. So I guess for a large organization that maybe is more familiar with making incremental tweaks and small sort of daily incremental changes, how does that organization, I guess, create an environment where they can make radical innovation and compete with these startups that are trying to disrupt the space? And I guess, from the financial services perspective, we are seeing large banks buy out smaller digital banks, so that they have this new sort of arm to their business, to be able to compete against all of the challenges that are entering the market.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because the larger organizations are generally steeped in history. They've got a long tradition of actually showing value, not just for customers, but for shareholders. And they've actually generally very well run organizations. However, what holds them back to a fair extent is that they're also steeped in legacy systems. At the rate of technology change, it is really phenomenal, right? And if you're looking at the smaller fintechs, they are they're a lot more digital. They're a lot more agile in terms of what they're setting up. They're not steeped in that history and legacy, and they don't have a million customers on a platform that they need to migrate, so they can't think outside the square. For a long time, we were actually restricted by our regulators not wanting to go SaaS, but over the past 4 or 5 years, that's opened up a little bit more, so that makes it easier for us. The other thing, when you find with the more nimble, more agile sort of startups that are coming up, they are typically single product or limited product offerings, whereas the larger guys have got pretty massive product sets. They've got multiple variations or iterations for home loans, for example, or multiple types of credit cards they offer, different types of lending, and it's all and they've got an entire infrastructure that sits behind each of those. So transforming that becomes harder. Where the sort of industry, not just in banking, but across the board, where we're actually moving to, it's starting to leverage, and it's relatively new in the BPM world, it's process mining, task mining. So when I say relatively new, 4 to 5 years ago, we haven't even heard of that. And I know that one of our previous process mining guests, Nigel Adams, is doing a PhD in process mining into financial crime. That's completely green fields in that, using process mining data to try and manage what goes on in financial crime, because it is a massive, massive problem for financial services. That's really something to look at. 5 years ago, I'm sure if you asked Nigel this, he wouldn't have even thought about doing this. Yes. So it just opened up the doors, completely with this. And so when you talk process mining, task mining, that's actually getting, when we're in the BPM world or process world, data is number one for us. What's the data through the pipe? It's our Lean Six Sigma programs. Everything else is based on data and performance. Process mining and task mining gives us that information. But what do we do with it? That's a problem, right? So, and once again, we come back down to how do we run the business better with that data, or how do we transform it better with that data? So it's how do you take process mining data, task mining data, and you help it, for example, to drive your automation programs. And when you talk RPA, once again, 6 years ago, RPA was, there. If you look at the RPA journey, I think it's less than 20 years now that Blue Prism first launched IPM, and they were called RPA, and they were the pioneers in RPA. Now you look at all the platforms out there that's actually offering RPA, but I'm sort of involved in a product that is looking at automating the automation process. And so when you talk automation or RPA, there's generally 3 stages you go through, and that's your, and that's your discovery, your sort of design, and your development. And your discovery being what exactly is a process, either at a task level or a process level, and that's where process mining and task mining comes in. when you're looking at design is what are you actually automating? Because when you look at the process, it's never clean. There's so many different variations, decision points, scenarios you'd look at. And then you'd sort of go down the path of, okay, what exactly do you develop from an automation perspective? So the product I've sort of actually come across with through some of my partners who are based in the UK, it's all about automating the discovery, automating the design, and writing up to 70% of the code that takes automation in an RPA program from 16 to 20 weeks down to 3 or 4 weeks. So you start to realize benefits a lot better, and and you can implement a lot quicker.
That's great.
Really fascinating.
And how has the adoption or the take-up rate been for these new technologies like process mining and RPA? Is it something that you're noticing a lot of organizations are jumping into and seeing significant value delivered, or is it something where there is some sort of hesitation because it is a newer technology? Yeah,
it's relatively newer, and and with myself with 30 plus years working experience, it's us old guys need to embrace something new to give us the edge, and so we sort of research a little bit into it. But when I'm talking process mining, there's so many players out there, and actually newer players, and so exploring your options in terms of what you're looking at is quite interesting. There are various price points. There are various, some of them look at different, different sectors. Some of the process mining companies look at actually integrating back into our process mapping and process modeling software. So all of those things sort of come into play. And then when you look at task mining, it's once again you got your usual, you find your usual suspects actually pop up, as I call it, that offer those. And generally, those two are not very well stitched together, process mining and task mining. They need to work together. And the fundamental, sort of difference between the two. So process mining looks at your system. It gives you your timestamps and your event logs and, your personnel doing stuff. And that's purely systems data. When you're looking at task mining, that's your human interaction. It's when are people dropping in and out of systems, what are they doing manually on spreadsheets and all of those kind of things. So a combination of process mining and task mining actually throws a complete spotlight on the process rather than on pockets of the process. So for most organizations, I'd say don't go just to process mining or just into task mining. You got to understand why you want to do it. Are you actually always go back to the first question? Are you looking at actually using the data to run the business better or to transform the business? Because we should not be selling the need to do process mining without saying why we need to do it, or the need to do task mining, why we need to do it. And that's where we fall short. It's like, like saying we need to do BPM, but when we ask why, it's if we don't tie it back to the strategic challenges the organization is facing, you generally come into roadblocks.
Yes, right. And I guess for those organizations out there that, and there are plenty that come to my mind at least, where they have never really properly managed their business processes, but they're hearing about these technologies and the value that they can deliver. Would you say that there are any sort of foundational things that these organizations need to put in place before adopting this technology? Because I think that is a potential risk that, an organization will invest into something and it actually just falls flat because they don't have foundational elements in place.
I typically work on 3 sort of foundations you absolutely need to have. The first one is, what's your architecture? What does that look like? And that's, and I'll come back to architecture in a moment, because that is very often misunderstood, or it goes too deep. So we just need to be really clear on what architecture is. The second aspect is that you need a single source of truth for your process knowledge or your business activity, or whatever you're doing, whatever sort of tool or system you're using, that should be your single source for what your processes are. And the third aspect I sort of look at is what's your accountabilities and your ownership model? Who owns the content? So the system or the platform can set whatever in the organization. But when you build up a business activity model or a process model for a certain part of the business, we need to be absolutely clear who owns it and who's accountable for it. And ownership and accountability is generally along three lines as well. So in the first instance, who's responsible for executing? Secondly, who's responsible for maintaining the knowledge of what that process is? And thirdly, who's accountable for change? Who's got decision rights, design rights to be able to change that? Now, it depends on the part of the process, right? Because you can start from your level 1 all the way down to your level 4 or 5. And so you set your ownership and your accountability and your boundaries for each of those levels. And if you're struggling to find, a single point owner for all three, then you need to have the best then you need to have the best model in that how you actually get all three of those accountabilities to work together in an ownership model. And that's, then that may be simple, or it may be a bit more challenging depending on the organization. That's the sort of third aspect, the ownership and accountability. But I know I did say I'll come back to architecture. So I think where architecture really gets lost, when you're looking at the different types of architecture domains you have within an organization, your process architecture in terms of, what's your taxonomy, what's your process levels, what's your process attributes, and that's your architecture. You get a data architecture, you get your IT architecture, your systems architecture. You also get your organizational designers, that actually maintain an architecture in terms of process hierarchy, those kind of things. Depending on your product complexity, you get a product architecture as well. So all of these things need to gel together. And your business architecture generally focuses on, okay, here's our customers, how do they get value, and how do we as an organization get value out of that customer set? And your business architect works out, okay, what's the best way? Because your customer generally has got 4 or 5 different channels they actually they actually interact with us. So it's either your mobile app, your website app, snail mail where they post, I don't know if anyone does it anymore. You lick a stamp and you get something, or it's email or a call center or a branch. There's a few ways customers interact with us. So your business architects generally work out customer interaction point, what supports that interaction point, the processes, the organizational structure or teams, the data requirements, the systems, the products, those kind of things. And that's how your architecture generally hangs together. From a from a process architecture perspective, we need to have that breadth of knowledge. So we don't need to be able to delve deep into every one of those because those are specialist disciplines. But we need to understand what value each of them provide, and they need to be part of the consideration when we're developing anything in the process space. So we need to, for example, be really clear what are the channels we're using, what customers are accessing those channels, and what are the processes that support that. And at the same time, it's, what's the organizational structure or the team construct that works on those processes, and what systems do they use? Speaks for itself.
Yes, right.
So from a foundation perspective, if we focus on architecture, getting a single source of truth for our process and not having it stuck, sitting multiple places in the organization, and at the same time get an ownership and accountability model, that's crucial.
Great, that's good. And just to jump back to a point that you were making earlier about automating the discovery, the design, and the automation aspect, what trends are you noticing moving forward into the future? Obviously, we've already got process mining, we've already got RPA, we've already got these newer technologies that some organizations have jumped into, other organizations are yet to. But what do you see over the next 5-10 years in terms of the technology that will be coming out and supporting organizations in their process management journey?
Oh God, I wish I knew. I'd become a billionaire. Because if I knew what I knew now 5 years ago, it would be a different I'd be in a different place. But I think looking at the trends, process mining and task mining will become a lot more prevalent. I think in financial services, especially the larger financial services organizations, most of them have got these programs in place. So they got automation programs, RPA programs. The challenge they've got is how not to do it in silos. I mean, I know that I know of a large corporate in Australia that had to turn off roughly 200 plus robots because they went down the path of automating, and they look at, when you're looking at the benefits of automation, historically what we've done is looked at silos, or we looked at pockets. We can automate this part of the process. So what they're finding is that as they're getting more used to the data, you're finding that, okay, we should not have automated those parts. We should have actually taken it a step or two above, because maybe you don't need that part of the process. So this large organization has invested a significant amount of dollars, because robots cost a lot of money. And if you take not just the cost of the robot, but the cost of implementation with specialist consulting fees and everything else that comes in, it becomes a very expensive program. And when you're turning off a robot, that's when, 2 years later, when you're turning it off, generally the person that put it in place has moved on. And so who's accountable and who carries a loss, or who's next on the line, it's not there very often. But I think the other sort of trend I'm actually looking at is, and I know there's a few products out now that's looking at this as well, is starting to measure the utilization of bots. So, let's face it, robots don't work business hours. They don't work 9 to 5. They should be 24/7. And so you don't put in, so if you're looking at a process in finance, for example, and you're automating something in there, so typically that's an independent program for something in HR, for example. And your business case will now take into account, okay, for finance, we need 5 bots to do this, and for HR, it's 3 bots to do that. Whereas if you look at it together, you may only need 4 bots across it, because if you're running 24/7 and it's not all using the bot at the same time, so the benefits start to speak for itself. So it's that siloed mentality will slowly start to disappear. And that's my one sort of aspect that I'm actually looking forward to. And secondly, when you start to look at RPA programs, that bot utilization becomes really, really interesting. How do we manage that? And of course, there's all the new terms and jargon that I hear starting to learn about a lot more. You got AI, you got machine learning, you got all of those kind of stuff. When you started looking at intelligent automation, where it's exactly what I spoke about earlier when I said autonomous automation, where it's you doing everything from discovery to actually writing the code at the push of a button. Your intelligent automation takes those learnings and starts to make it, starts to get the wheel spinning faster again. So I'm not a technical person, but I'm trying to learn some of this. In fact, I sat through a process mining course over the past couple of days with another one of our pioneers, with Marcelo, and I found that very, very useful, because it's actually opened up my eyes to a few things that I just took for granted, and I didn't realize how it was being done.
Right. And what do we do with, I guess, the workforce, or these people that I'm assuming that the more bots that are deployed and are working 24/7, what happens to those people, or what should we be doing? Should we be putting some attention or focus on upskilling? Is it just the case that naturally our organization headcount will get smaller as more and more of our operations are run by robots? What does that look like for business analysts that, if a large portion of their skill set is able to be done by sort of artificial intelligence or robots, things like that? Should we be giving that any thought, or what are your thoughts on that?
We definitely should be giving that a lot of thought, because people are people, right? We just can't cut people out of the system, because what will our society turn into? So I think it's, there's a lot of effort into reskilling, and I'm seeing that across the board. But the fact of the matter is that, if I'm taking the Australian banks as an example, every one of them has gone on a, headcount reduction program over the past 4 or 5 years. And we're generally seeing a lot of people being turned over. They're being, that are actually being redeployed, or, wherever they may go, they go on to other things. But at the same time, for these same organizations, those headcount, in essence, hasn't really gone down. There are, headcount in certain functions have, and headcount in other functions haven't, because there's actually new disciplines coming up all the time. So when you start to look at, if I look at controls as an example, right? If I'm looking at the compliance world, 10 years ago, you had a CRO's office and you had a lean skinny risk team. Now you got chief controls officers, chief compliance officers. You've got a controls team that, if I'm looking at the average Big Four bank in Australia at 1,200 people, these are all new roles, new skill sets that's being there. So it's actually, the headcount's not going down, but the sort of workforce dynamic is shifting. And I think the challenge for a lot of the people working in this is, where should we be reskilling? I look at myself. I've never imagined myself being able to talk process automation or RPA or, process mining techniques, and actually understanding how that works to add value. And that's completely different. And the people working in that field, if you asked them 5 or 10 years ago, it would be, we'd not know what it is. In fact, I went to a really interesting conference a few years ago, and I think it would have been the Telstra, one of the Telstra customer things they have, and they had, and it was actually Sir Ken Robinson. He is a guy that brokered the IRA peace deal for, in the UK, and he spoke about the shifting dynamics of the workforce, and he mentioned that 10 years ago, roughly 60-70% of the jobs people are doing today in the corporate world did not exist. Right. So 5 years from now, I look at myself when I actually graduated uni, and would I be doing what I'm doing? Did this exist? It was not thought of. So 5 years, hey, who knows?
Yes, yeah, that's right. And one last question around the year that, or the 18 months that we're sort of still coming through with COVID, and that obviously disrupted a lot of organizations. And I mean, you mentioned earlier, talking about business resilience and being prepared, I guess, for turbulent times. And we can look at the last 18 months, and that's certainly sort of disrupted a lot of organizations. For some, it's created the environment for them to really thrive, because it's forced them to think creatively, think outside of the box. How can we deliver value in this new sort of world that we're living in? And for other organizations that weren't able to adapt as quickly, or maybe it was that there was such a big ship, it was very hard and very slow to make such a radical sort of change or pivot. How has the process management approach played a part in the last 18 months? Have you seen it sort of come to move up the priority list, or have you seen it kind of been pushed aside as a bit of we don't have the time, effort, energy, or resources to focus on that at the moment?
Yeah, I think the need for what we're doing in the process space has increased, because if we don't think about it from if we don't use a process word, right? If you're looking at, especially, you take an industry like retail, where, whilst I empathize with the lockdowns and the shutdowns, what's happened to a lot of retail staff, what it's done to the industry on the whole, though, it's actually created a completely new value line, online. The fact that, and you're getting your typical online sellers like Amazon and those kind of things reaping the benefits of a lot of it. But a lot of other organizations, especially here in Australia, have actually stepped into that. And when I'm talking value lines, processes that underpin it, exactly, when I spoke about the architecture constructs, I've done a fair bit of shopping from either, Country Road or one of these other type of stores, or like, even Officeworks, we've bought stuff. So it's actually created those new service lines. So what's that value chain? What does that architecture look like? Who the customer is, how are they interacting, the processes that sit beneath it. So we need to actually get robust in doing all of that. That's not a temporary channel they put in place. That is more prevalent. A lot of people are shopping online. And it's not just how they're buying, it's what they're buying as well. And so that's opened up a few doors for us. And how do we step into it? So I think what we do will not actually change. It's how we focus it, because every company out there is still looking to enhance their bottom line, and they're looking at a better way of doing it, a better way of servicing the customers, better way of managing their compliance, productivity, all of those kind of things. And that's the value we bring in. So I think the demand for what we're doing has anything gone up, because we will need to stabilize all those short-term measures these organizations put in place.
Yeah, great. And for those senior leaders that are maybe listening to this conversation and it's piqued their interest, maybe they're recognizing the value that sort of this BPM approach can bring to their organization, and can sort of maybe solve some of the problems that they are currently facing. Where do these people go to learn more about this approach? Obviously, the internet has, a lot of different resources and things out there, but how do you know what information to trust and what's relevant for your organization, and where do you go?
That's a hard one, Daniel, because there's always Dr. Google, right, and Dr. LinkedIn that provides a lot of these sort of insights. You'd find most of the larger organizations have got people like myself employed in there, and they probably just don't know where they are. My old adage is that a prophet in his own country is never respected. So these senior leaders sort of almost default to bringing in a tier one consultancy at a significant cost to come in and help them shape what this looks like. So the first instance is look internally. Who do you have? And your typical roles you'll find in there, you've got Lean Six Sigma specialists, you've got operations management specialists, you've got continuous improvement teams, you've got operations teams. So you just need to talk internally before you go outside. And I think that's why a lot of our community working in the larger corporates feel undervalued to a certain extent, because management would come in and pay a seven-figure sum to a consultancy to come and tell them exactly what we are saying.
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, Tiger, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today and having this conversation. Obviously, we've been able to pack only been able to pack so much into a sort of 45, 50-minute conversation, but I've certainly been gleaning a lot and been taking a lot of notes, and I know that our audience will have gleaned a lot from this conversation as well. So I just want to thank you for sitting down and having this chat with me today.
Absolute pleasure, Daniel. Hoping to chat soon. You keep well.